And to just connect with someone who's not only in the space, but who is the brains behind probably one of the most innovative pieces of outreach when it comes to remote workers in the Caribbean ever. I was like, wow, I have to speak to this guy. I have to find out more about him. So yeah, tell me more about you and how you were explaining that initially it was a blog post that you wrote.
Yes.
And then that led to conversations. But yeah, tell me more about you.
Well, I mean, one of my bad habits is arguing with strangers on the internet. And so I was on this forum, which is mostly about Barbados politics. But there was a post by a Caribbean tourism expert, which I thought was all wrong. Basically, this was in the middle of April 2020. And so we'd been shut down for about a month. And everybody was, arrivals went from hundreds of thousands to zero. And so he was talking about the future of the tourism industry. And he was talking about, well, what we need to do, is give everything a nice coat of paint and reopen next season. And I was saying, you're crazy. There is no next season. This is a big deal. It's not going away in a couple of months. We need to completely reinvent the industry. And what's more, we're way too dependent on tourism in Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean. And so I started sharing all of the data which led me to this conclusion. And eventually he and some other people said, well, what you're saying is catastrophic. Like, so what should we do? And I took the question seriously, because curling up in a ball and crying doesn't get you very far. And so I thought about it for a while. And then, because most of my career has been in Canada, I only got back to Barbados 4 years ago. Yeah, almost 4. And so, of course, all of my colleagues and friends and family in Canada and the States were all in lockdown too, and everybody was working from home. And so when talking to these people, they of course said, yeah, we'd much rather be where you are. And I said, but of course, they'd much rather be where I am. So why don't we set up a program to bring them? And so I talked about this on the forum that I was arguing on. And then, I mean, I'm a management consultant, so I started running some numbers, and they were very appealing. And so then I did a blog post and I wrote an article in the newspaper. But it was the blog post, because nobody reads my blog. I just use it to sort of document ideas that I'm thinking about. And so it went from about 5 unique visitors a day to 5,000 unique visitors a day in 24 hours.
Wow.
And so I knew that, yeah, this could have appeal. And one of the people who saw my blog post was, a distant acquaintance. We'd been at high school together, but he's about 5 years older. So he was a big boy when I was a little boy. But he is very connected to the ruling political party here. He's married to, well, cohabiting with the Minister of Education. And so he said, well, put it in a memo and leave out all the parts where you say nasty things about the government. And that he'd make sure that the Prime Minister, that it was in front of the Prime Minister.
Amazing.
And I mean, I really didn't expect anything, because I'd expected that she'd, delegate it. give it to some bureaucrat who would form a committee, who would write a white paper.
5 years later,
Yeah. So when she announced it, basically 8 weeks later, I was just astonished and so happy because it's so required for economic recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So you didn't hear anything, you sent it off and 8 weeks later, that was the next, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, my only communication is through this, old boy back channel. I talk to Tony, tell him what I think. Tony asks me questions, I answer them for Tony. And it just goes back and forth that way.
Unbelievable. And I think that shows the power of politicians doing things differently, because as you say, that thing where you kind of workshop it to death or white paper it to death, the moment requires speed and agility.
Yes.
And yeah, could you imagine that reaction happening with such speed or taking on board such an unconventional idea at any other time?
No. It was necessity. And yeah, because it still blows my mind that even at this time that it got through, our political process. I mean, the fact that it was, this old school tie type of connection sort of validates so much that is completely wrong with our political system. Because of course, that should not be how things are done. It should be better, more resilient processes for innovation.
Yeah, but still, I mean, I think it for whatever reason, it still speaks volumes about Barbados, because Grenada is also looking at introducing a digital nomad visa, probably we're July now, so probably 14 months after Barbados has got it up and running, shown that it works, and it's still not officially signed off and still not enacted. So I think that tells you what the worst case scenario is like.
Yeah, but you're not alone. In fact, it's not Barbados so much as Mia Motley.
Yes.
And the fact that in our governance structure, the immigration department is part of the Prime Minister's office. So she didn't have to really even take it to cabinet. This was her domain completely.
Yeah.
And because later, months later, I talked to the guy who was Minister of Tourism at the time. And he thought it was a wonderful idea, but basically he had just about no part in the decision-making implementing it. It was just put on his desk as a fait accompli. Like,
wow. Yeah.
This is what the immigration department is doing. So now the tourism department has to deal with it.
Get on board. Wow. And from where you are in Barbados and from whatever level of communication you've had in the process, have you seen the extent to which internationally it's just a huge thing? Do is it Bajans or Barbadians? What's the correct way?
Both, Bajans.
Okay, I never.
And Barbadians.
Okay, let's say Barbadians. Let's try and be proper. But do Barbadians get the sense of what an impact this has made internationally?
Some do, but it's very variable. There are lots of people, even in the tourism industry, who don't really understand its impact. Its biggest impact has been in the section of the tourism industry, which is villa rentals, because the largest villa rental company had an all-time record year in 2020, when the rest of the tourism industry had their worst year on record. So because the managing director there did understand quickly the potential, and he went out and hustled.
Yeah.
The rest of the tourism industry is coming along. I'm working with a group of small hotels that many of whom have, self-catering apartments, to try to bring them on board. A lot of the industry still thinks that it's just a reaction to COVID. And they think once they get a handle on managing COVID, that this won't be as important. But they're wrong, because they don't understand how COVID has made a fundamental change in European and North American work culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you spell that out for us, for those who might think, okay, we're waiting for things to go back to how they were?
Well,
how do you see the future?
There are two aspects to it. The first is that things that were only part of the high technology industries have become normal in terms of vast numbers of people who work with technology, working from wherever they are, home, abroad, wherever, because their entire function is performed through the internet. It's not as though it's 50% of the workforce. It's nowhere near there. It will probably level out at 12 or 15%. But 12 or 15% is still like 100 million people once you talk about all of the developed world, which is a huge tourism market. But the other factor, which even fewer people understand, is that the tourism industry itself is being changed. The constraint for a visitor, they have to budget two things: their time and their money. Their time was always constrained by the national policies on vacation time. So somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks, depending on where they live, they have to budget for tourism. The other part was their monetary budget, because when they are visiting another destination, they still have to be paying all their bills at home. They still have to be paying their rent and paying the electricity and paying the heating. Remote work changes that equation, because now the budget per year is all year in terms of the time budget. And the monetary budget is your entire disposable income when you wrap up and either leave or sublet your apartment. So what this means for the destination is that they get an incredibly much greater share of that person's wallet. And so this is good also because the psychographic of the visitor is changing somewhat. Younger, more adventurous, because of course the leading edge is the more adventurous types. They're the ones who jumped at this opportunity first. But more adventurous also means interesting things for the destination. It means they want the authentic destination experience. They don't want a tourist bubble.
Yeah, so community tourism,
Yes.
actually immersive.
Yeah, exactly, immersive experience, not pretending that this is just an outpost of home.
Yeah.
And so I hope the entire Caribbean grows to understand this. And Antigua has a program now, Curacao has a program, Bermuda has a program, Montserrat's trying to start a program. So it's spreading. And I don't see why every tourism destination should not do this. In fact, what's her name? Petra.
Petra, yeah, she's just joined us.
She just arrived in Grenada. So I really hope that she learns everything from Barbados and implements a Grenada program. The other thing is that there's opportunity at least at the upper end of the market. And the upper end of the market is quite a big part of the market. There are the rentals.
Mm-hmm.
We have a significant, I mean, I don't have a scientific measurement of the share, but we have a significant part of the Welcome Stamp visitors who are paying between 5,000 US and 10,000 US a month in rent. So they're obviously well-heeled, and a number of them think nothing of, oh, why don't we go to Dominica for the weekend? And it's not the ridiculous local airfares which are the problem, it's just the quarantine regulations. So I really think we should expand the Caribbean-wide quarantine regulations to have standards and have interoperability so that people can just, haven't seen Grenada, let's go to Grenada for a week.
Yeah.
Take our laptops, find Wi-Fi, we can work from there too.
Yeah. And I guess also the fact that at least for Grenada, that the standards are constantly changing. Obviously, it's a changing environment,
Yes.
but when we're trying to make plans to know, is it 48 hours? Is it a week? Do I have to be fully vaccinated?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So it'll take a while to work all those things out, but I hope we get them worked out in time, because this is a long-term economic sector, and COVID is a long-term effect on our economy. It's not going to suddenly disappear.
Mm.
And this segment of the economy, of the visitor, they're clearly the same demographic who, had they still been in San Francisco, would take a week in Vegas. So it's nothing new to them to just pick up and fly for an hour. It's routine.
Yeah. And what do you think it is that's drawing them? What do you think that's drawing them to the Caribbean, or what sort of person do you think is drawn to the Caribbean versus Bali or Mexico or any of the other places where people typically would have?
Yes, well, the conventional digital nomad in Bali or Thailand or Tulum was not as well off. Definitely. They were much more in the backpacking segment of the demographic. The reason it's different is simply that, like in Barbados, there's a 50K US dollar minimum annual income you have to prove. So that leaves out a very large percentage of those who would trek to Bali. The other thing is that in Bali and Thailand, and to a lesser extent in Mexico, they formed cliques. They weren't at all integrated into the local economy and population. They were just these little hotspots where they then constituted the majority, with the local population just serving them. What I think the Caribbean has the opportunity to build is a much more healthy type of relationship. And I'll tell you, my long-term objective is to understand that the value that these people are bringing to Barbados is, of course, their spending, but much more than that, it's the human capital. They are essentially experts in the 21st century economy. They are technological natives. They live entirely, their life is mediated through internet-based technologies. And what I want, of course, I want many thousands, 10,000 would be a nice number, of these remote workers living in Barbados. But then I want another 10,000 or more Barbadians becoming colleagues of these same people, because many of them have the digital skills, but not the network.
Absolutely.
They don't have the contacts to land these jobs. But in the WhatsApp groups, it's already happening here, where people are saying, these are WhatsApp groups populated by both locals and Welcome Stamp visitors. And they're saying, oh, my company's just about to post this position. Is anybody interested? Or circulate it to those who might be interested, because it's a fully remote position, which means that any Barbadian with the skills is eligible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's ultimately where it's at, isn't it, in terms of sustainability, of how not only does the Caribbean provide hospitality and a welcome from those from overseas, but how do we elevate our own citizens to also be able to tap into these opportunities? And also, I loved what you said about, yes, there is this criteria of what is your income, but understanding what your networks can also bring to the island.
Yes.
How can you provide, HR intelligence to a local entrepreneur, or, as you say, connect them to a job opportunity? I think that's really the most exciting part. But what were your suggestions as to how to build that into the program, or how to build that into the ecosystem so that you don't end up with a Bali type situation?
The private sector is going to have to do it. It is much too, I don't know, it's not something that governments will be able to do. It's something that takes people-to-people relationships and sensitivity and careful construction of an ecosystem. It needs people like you, basically, meeting these people and knowing which Grenadians and finding which Grenadians they should talk to, and essentially setting up both social and business networks locally, which are occupied by both Grenadians and visitors on an equal footing.
Yeah.
Then just by experimentation, figuring out where the opportunities are, talking to people. Because that's another thing. In Barbados, I've been very happy that a big priority of the Welcome Stamp visitors is contributing to Barbados. They're overt about it. How can I give back? And it starts with like them wanting to volunteer. And of course, yeah, they can have them volunteer in areas of their passion, like at the animal center, or just areas where everybody needs, there's work to be done, like picking up on the beach. But it would be much more powerful for them to be volunteering in their area of expertise and figuring out how to leverage their area of expertise for local benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think also that thing of having been trapped for so long and isolated, that desire for connection, of meaningful interaction, to really harness that in an authentic way, I think is so
Yes,
powerful.
it's so powerful, and they are so open for it, hungry for it. And I understand why, because of course they've just left all their social network behind. So there's this vacuum to fill in their lives. So when you put opportunities in front of them, yes, they love it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that thing of it's not just about escaping, it's not just about working from the beach. It is that extra layer of Myra's hierarchy of needs, you know,
Yes,
self
exactly.
how do
Yeah.
we add that element? And I think that's the I mean, it's simple, but it's also not easy, is it?
No, it's not easy, and it takes understanding. It's not something that you do through a bureaucracy.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And so what are you involved in? I doubt
Well,
you left
I'm
me
trying
the time.
essentially to build an ecosystem, and I know it's going to take a while, but there are lots of people helping, both Welcome Stamp visitors and locals. And so, yeah, it's incubating an ecosystem. So it's not as though I am, designing it on paper and implementing it. There's nothing like that at all. It is a very organic, very authentic process of talking to people and helping them and connecting this person to that person, figuring out what sort of events might be what they'd like, experimenting with them, trying it, doing it all without spending a lot of money so that you can afford to experiment, afford to learn. And yeah, and I really hope other people on other islands start doing the same, and then we can start building connections between islands as well.
Yeah, you almost make me want to move to Barbados, but yeah. I'll stay here and see what can be done. But from the original post on the forum to the blog post, what has been the most surprising element of actually seeing it in action in real life? Like, obviously you're incredibly talented, you've got a lot of vision, but from seeing it come to life, what element has surprised you most?
Oh, well, you radically overestimate my vision. Well, my strength is actually my capacity to adapt. So when I was arguing with the tourism experts, I got into that argument essentially because my position on the economy was that, tourism was plantation 2.0, and we should just chuck the whole mess. And then I looked, rather than being, just argumentative, is my neighbors working in the industry? So you can't chuck your neighbors. So you have to figure out an evolutionary strategy that allows us to grow in a direction where we leave behind some of the worst and grow towards something better. So like my first blog post, it was called something like Barbados Beyond Tourism. But of course, this isn't beyond tourism. This is actually an evolution of tourism. And the other thing, of course, is when I first configured, when I was, scribbling on the backs of napkins and envelopes, doing just the ballpark figures of, well, is it worth me even bothering to think about this? What's the scale that could be achieved? And when I figured out that, yeah, we're talking in a very conservative scenario, we could easily do hundreds of millions, and we can grow this into $1 billion industry in like 5 or half a dozen years. Yeah, that's exciting. It's hard to grow a sector of the economy to $1 billion. It's really hard, and there really aren't that many opportunities.
Yeah.
But if you have 10,000 well-heeled visitors spending 100,000 US a year, that's $1 billion US. And our minimum is 50,000, but I am guessing that our average is closer to 70 in income. And of course, we'd have to do a bunch of infrastructural development to accommodate like 13,000 new residents in the sort of places they want to live with the sort of amenities they want to have. But that too is an opportunity, not a problem.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that Mia Motley jumped on the idea, because apart from being really smart, she has an agenda. She thinks Barbados has too few people.
Yeah.
We are quite densely populated as a country, but she understands that, yeah, we're a country, but really we're a small town surrounded by water. And you can't, also our population is aging because, of course, we export our young people. And so I know it's unspoken in her agenda, but I know it coincides with my agenda, which is that I put a lot of extra effort into recruiting people from the African diaspora.
Okay.
From Europe or the UK or Canada or the States. People with some sort of Caribbean heritage, especially. And then, yeah, I want to turn them into full-time neighbors, because that gets me faster to the tens of thousands of Bajans working in the global economy and getting their paycheck from Dubai or Paris or London or New York.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the, I guess Barbados, I've only passed through Barbados a few times, but in my head, Barbados feels like much more of a mature tourism market, and one in which, because it's such a dominant part of the industry, of the country, people are more open than they are in Grenada to that influx of new people. Whereas in Grenada, even with just the limited amount of coverage that there's been about the potential workation visa, there's been a lot of pushback of like, do we really want these people here? What are they going to do to our country?
Well, the thing is, one workation visitor replaces the spending of about 20 vacation visitors.
Wow.
So this isn't about getting more people, it's about getting more money from fewer people.
Right. I didn't know that statistic, but that speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And one with different motivations as well, I imagine, because the sort of person who's going to rock up and be willing to spend a significant amount of time in protection.
Because, yeah, they don't stay, there's no hotel to stay at. They have to go out, buy vegetables from the vendors, and they want to say, oh, what's that? I haven't tasted that before. How do you cook it? And learn. And they want to, they want to do all the things that they didn't have an opportunity to do where they came from. So scuba diving schools, all-time record enrollments, surfing schools, all-time record enrollments. Because often you have, hundreds of thousands of visitors when you're just coming for vacation, but it's a very superficial experience for them because they don't have the time to invest in learning how to surf, because you don't do it in a single afternoon. You have to go back and get better and better and better. But now that when people are here for a year, they want that sort of thing. They want to take, Monday and Thursday for the next 6 weeks and then join the surfing club.
So thinking in terms of numbers and impact, if we were comparing cruise visitors versus vacation visitors.
Cruise visitors are useless.
Right, but what are we?
Cruise visitors they're like locusts. In Barbados, I don't know about Grenada, but in Barbados, I think the average spend was about $80 US.
Wow.
$80. So essentially, we are 1 year into the Welcome Stamp program. It is already, after 1 year, with close to zero public investment. I think we hired 6 people in the immigration department to run the program, but they might have already been working in the immigration department. I don't know. But really tiny public investment. It is worth more to Barbados than our entire cruise industry that we have spent 3 decades and tens of millions of public investment building up.
Wow. Yeah. And to think about the amount of energy that people spend chasing those cruise tourists.
Yes, just for $1 here and $1 there. And in Barbados, of course, because the cruise industry runs on tight logistics. Tight logistics are the domain of people with capital. And so in Barbados, the overwhelming benefit is to the people who can own their own air-conditioned coaches, own the old plantation house where they go from the port to the plantation house and back, and can, and for the average citizen, they see nothing of this unless they're working as a maid in the plantation house.
Yeah. I hope people watch this on repeat, because I think the desire for things to return to normal for some people is so pressing that they're missing the huge opportunity that is just dangling in front of their eyes.
And it's a huge opportunity. And that really is what excites me, because it really is an opportunity to put a stake into the 21st century in our economy. You see, doing that has always been dreaming of creating, Silicon Island or Silicon Beach or Silicon Caribbean. But that is hard because the scale of investment that it requires to compete with Israel and Estonia and New York and San Francisco and Palo Alto, it's just really, really hard. So what happens is we lose our best minds to developed entrepreneurial ecosystems where they can, have an idea and raise 20 million US in capital. Doing that in Barbados is just about impossible. Do it in Grenada is just, it's prayer, nothing more. And it is much more realizable to simply sit in Grenada and work for a startup that is based in Palo Alto and let them pay you 70 grand.
Yeah. And I love the way in which, as you say, it's a way to sort of decentralize the tourism industry. So it's not just about the huge hotels, it's not just about the typical locations, it's actually at a community level. How do we make sure that the local potter can offer tours, or that this cook can provide meals? But I guess on the other perspective, understanding that global shift in the way in which people work, are you yet at the point where you're engaging companies directly?
Yes.
So, okay. Because the taxation implications are also
Okay.
far.
Barbados has finessed the taxation implications by saying, we don't want any of your taxes. Pay them all in the US or wherever you came from. This is because we don't want pushback from those governments who think we're stealing their tax base. We just want your spending. Now, when they get here, yeah, many of them ask, yeah, I'm here and I'm paying all these American taxes. Is there a way?
Yeah.
And for many, there is. I mean, first of all, America taxes on worldwide income. No matter where you live, you pay American taxes. But the first, I think in 2021, it's 136,000 US is not taxable. And so a very large proportion fit under 136,000 US. So they can simply be no longer US resident and they still have to file their US tax return every year, but they can be completely compliant and increase their take-home pay. And there are businesses in the States which do that because you need an official address. So they're mostly setting up in places like South Dakota. So you live in South Dakota, but no, you actually are in Barbados. Your US presence is a mailbox in South Dakota.
Yeah, I know it's an interesting topic. I mean, there's an Irish NGO that's all about making sure that local citizens in remote parts of Ireland get to tap into the remote working opportunities that are available in Europe. But I remember watching a series that they did, I think it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, a lot of like redundant towns are trying to encourage people to move and set up to really build an ecosystem.
Exactly.
And yeah, the taxation element did seem something to be not insurmountable, but definitely something to be considered.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it feels like a movement, but it's not. It's kind of just an inevitable shift.
Yes.
And that being intentional about how do we seize this opportunity and make sure that we harness the benefit of the Caribbean, which for so long has been a region that's all about the brain drain. How do we bring talent back in?
Yes, it's kind of a brain drain to our benefit now.
Yeah, absolutely. But what do you think are the main challenges that islands are going to face when it comes to doing this well, aside from speed and actually
treating the early adopters really, really nicely. So that means just the basics, like when they have a problem, fixing it. For example, lots of people who are, just average people, they browse the web and they think they have adequate internet access. But when you have a multiple occupancy property and everybody is on Zoom simultaneously, and those that aren't are on Netflix and HBO, then you need the sort of bandwidth that can handle that. Places, when they rent to people who are working remotely, need to configure them so that they can work. The kitchen table probably isn't optimal. So, a desk, a good office chair. there are a lot of unattached women on the welcome stamp. We have to get Caribbean men to stop being assholes.
Yeah, that article. Have you read that article? I haven't read it.
Yes. And I know the person, and it's not just her, it's so many. And it's damaging. People have to be comfortable. People have to have a good time, and being harassed is not the right way.
Mm. Yeah, sadly, it's not just a Caribbean problem. It's
No, it isn't. And
across-
people have pointed that out to me. But if we fix it, then it becomes a benefit. Yeah, you can come here from Spain and you don't have to have a paparazzi.
Yeah. Oh, Peter, fantastic. It's been even better than I imagined talking to you. It's just, yeah, it's really refreshing to connect with someone else who also has not just the vision, but is willing to put it in the action and the steps necessary to start making this shift work for the region. So yeah,
make contact with Petra, find out what she's doing, tell her you'll help in every way to make sure long-term visitors play a big part in the tourism economy in Grenada. I find that's the easier way to get it into rather than talking about remote work specifically. Basically, the value is more or less the same whether they're retired on $70,000 a year or working for $70,000 a year. And so essentially it is, let us bring long-term visitors, because you make more money from fewer visitors.